I can see you too.
Rasheen Aldridge, Jr. Pastor Tracy Blackman.
Present.
Tiara Carr. Gabe Gore. Becky James Hatter. Daniel Isom. Scott Negwar. Brittany Packnett. Felicia Pulliam. Pat Sly. Byron Watson. And Rose Windmiller. All right, thank you very much. At this time, I don't have my agenda in front of me, but I believe that we are going to have a welcome by Chris from LaunchCode. Could you please stand, Chris, so I can see you? Hey, all right, thank you for coming at this time.
Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the LaunchCode Mentor Center. LaunchCode is really honored to be a part of this event and to host the Ferguson Commission in this final meeting. I just briefly want to tell you who we are and what we're doing and what this space is. LaunchCode is a nonprofit that is devoted to creating economic opportunity by helping people find jobs in technology. And so this space is brand new. We opened it last month, and it is our educational hub. It's where we hold all of our educational programs, which are free and are developed with the goal of making equity, access, and diversity a priority in exposing people to technology. So that's what we do here. If you want to know more, talk to me or talk to anybody here that works at LaunchCode, and we'll happy to tell you more. And other than that, we're really excited and honored to be hosting this meeting. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for having us tonight, Chris. We also have one more welcome to do in form of invocation. We're going to ask Cynthia Williams, MSW, to come at this time for invocation.
Father, you have greatly favored us, our city, our region, our nation, with lavish and abundant resources and gifts, and we give you thanks for your favor. We ask that you reward these 16 commissioners and all community members according to their works, according to their contributions, and according to their investments in addressing the inequities of our daily life experiences. For some, Lord, the work is done. But you, God, are diligent to accomplish the works of your design and your hand. Father, complete the work. Be the equalizer. Be the rewarder of those who diligently seek your face. Father, send help. Send peace. Send deliverance to our region and to our world. In the incomparable name of Jesus, amen.
Good evening. My name is Starsky Wilson. I am blessed to serve as co-chair of the commission with my friend and brother, Rich McClure, and am pleased to see all of you here on tonight. Tonight is not only, I believe they say, the 19th meeting of the Ferguson Commission, but here just a little over a year since our first meeting on December 1st, 2014, it is also the final meeting of the Ferguson Commission. As the commission expires on December 31st, 2015. It is perhaps less intentional and more providential that we gather in this place on tonight, even though the activity that has happened on this corner is an activity that has sprouted in this place only in the last month. We also gather here with a Delmar address. We gather here at a place that has been so significant in the history of this region as a dividing line and a defining space for health outcomes on one side of the street, health outcomes on the other side of the street. Economic outcomes are different on one side of the street than they are on the other side of the street. Housing stock is different on one side of the street than it is on the other side of the street. And one's very length of life is different on one side of the street than it is on the other side of the street. So we end our work tonight in the final meeting of the Ferguson Commission at the Del Mar Divide. I didn't know that. I came to St. Louis in 2000, so I'll just take briefly a point of reflection here. I lived about 3 blocks up from here at the corner of Del Mar and Union. I didn't realize all the things that were going on around me at the time. I was just here working, trying to raise some money for United Way, help some people. But I lived at this particular dividing point, and it is critically important for all of the discussions we have had over the course of this last year, and perhaps will even play into our discussions here on tonight about how we move forward. I am mindful tonight of 2 people. One turned 99 years old in the last month. Ms. Frankie Freeman, who was the champion for our region, helped us when we came to one of these dividing points, when we would respond in and after the 1983 settlement, the desegregation case, and the St. Louis Public Schools, making sure that we would equitably care for the next generation through our public policy and through our investments thereof. She worked and continues to work, quite frankly, with Bill Danford to make sure that monitoring of that settlement happens, that there is accountability for that work in this community, that someone's paying attention. And they were very thoughtful to make sure there was resources for that kind of monitoring when the settlement was made. I'm also mindful tonight of one who has been a mentor to me since I came to St. Louis in 2000, Mr. James Buford, who is great champion for this region and this community, who deserves all of our honor for his fights in this community. And today, his family would welcome also our prayers and thoughts as he recovers, as he has been ailing. And so I invite your thoughts and your prayers for their service, the sacrifice that our dear sister and mother, Freeman, gave to this community as it sought to care for its children across these lines, and for Mr. Buford, as he joined hip with Bill Danford to help the community to overcome the challenges of fragmentation in healthcare, even with our great health assets that led to the establishment of the Regional Health Commission just over the course of the last 15 years. This is policy work that has been difficult, that we have done together. It will take the kind of commitment that we saw in those days, that we continue to see and persist even a generation later as it relates to the DSEG case, to make sure that the work that we have done over the course of the last year is not only fruitful, but rather has the kind of benefit that it can, should, and shall have for our children. And so I invite you to keep them in mind tonight as we seek to do this work, in as much as I honor them. Thank you. It is my charge to speak to a bit of the traction that we've had to date. I'll be brief in that, as we've already taken privilege. We note and we thank the community for its response to the Forward Through Ferguson report since the launch of the Digital First Report platform on September 14th. The website has been visited over 26,000 times for a total of over 68,000 page views. Facebook has been the largest driver of traffic to the platform through the sharing of community stories and experiences of St. Louisans in connection with the policy recommendations of the report. Text, photo, and video posts on Facebook sharing stories from community were engaged with 6 times more than other non-story posts. It means we're paying attention to one another's lives. As it relates to PDF download metrics, in the last 60 days, there have been over 2,100 downloads of the PDF form of the report, and in the last 30 days, there were 872. The community is reading, the community is engaging, the community is paying attention, and for this, I thank God. As we look at our work forward today, I turn to my co-chair, Rich McClure, to bring us reflections and to begin us in our work.
Thank you very much, Starsky, and thank all of you for being here at this meeting tonight. It's appropriate that we gather at this site not only as a state office building, since we are a state commission, but because it is the home of LaunchCode, which has as its stated purpose to create jobs and bring economic opportunity to diverse and under-resourced populations. And they are creating, even as we speak, in these rooms and in the back, to learn and to be mentored by companies and entities in the region. And just as our efforts are intended to bring innovation and creativity and to focus on those who have been marginalized and have not had seats at the table, it's appropriate that we be here in the spirit of that innovation. And the fact that this work and this journey has been, in fact, one not undertaken by other regions and undertaken uniquely in our region at a time when it's so desperately needed. I want to offer a few points of gratitude and then a couple of observations about tonight. First of all, we have in the audience a number of folks who have been about creating art and creating expressive ways to talk about the challenges and hopes and dreams of our opportunities. And if some of those artists are still here, I think they are in the back. They've been part of publications and books and paintings, and so we want to recognize their creative work. Could you all stand and so we could recognize your work and all that you've done? Thank you. This evening we will be working on what is to come next. And I think it's important when you think about what is to come next to consider where we have been. And just a little over a year ago when we met for our first meeting on December 1st, we began with the process of confronting our reality, and we heard from our community. We heard from folks who have been living the reality of our region, and after 100 days we published a report about confronting that reality. And then on September the 14th, after thousands of folks had participated in meetings, and 60 meetings of working groups and 22,000 volunteer hours, we delivered to our region a report, Forward Through Ferguson, A Path Toward Racial Equity. And that report really is not the culmination of our work, but in fact the first step of what for our region will be a very long and hard journey. But make no mistake, that journey must start with energy and momentum and passion and dedication. And it's what we have seen from this commission. But more importantly, it's what we have seen from the thousands of people who came to the table to be with us and to join with us as partners in this work. And so in unflinching and transformative ways, it has been our hope and prayer that what we have said during these many months will provide a pathway for the region, which now must come together and take ownership of this work. Across racial lines, across cultural lines, business, civic, community activists, frontline, grassroots organizations all must come together as they did around the work of the Ferguson Commission in order for us to make true progress and positive change. That was our aspiration from the very beginning. So I want to thank my co-chair, Starsky Wilson, my brother, that we started this work, not certain where it would lead us, not certain whether we should do it, in fact. But it has been an incredible journey and one in which I have grown immensely, spiritually, in ways of revelation and knowledge, and it is because of your partnership and our brotherhood, and I thank you, my friend. And then to our staff team, I want to get these thank yous here. The other commissioners will have a chance to do some reflections perhaps a little bit later, but while the cameras are here and while all of you are here, and sometimes that's not the case at the end of the meetings, I want to make sure that I thank Bethany Johnson-Javois, our managing director, and the incredible staff team that she assembled that worked tirelessly night and day, frequently through the night, in order to make sure that what you saw was unflinching, transformative, and truly groundbreaking. And so to Bethany and to the team, thank you. God bless you. And to our fellow commissioners, we'll have a chance to thank them later. We've already thanked them privately, but these folks have given sacrificially of time, many of them far more than they ever expected, but they stayed with us and stayed at the table, and more importantly, were there with passion and dedication and an incredible energy to find the common ground that would move us forward. To the commissioners, thank you. We're now going to move to this evening's work, which is to think about our partnership with Focus St. Louis and other community partners in designing an ecosystem. But we're going to start, as we always have, with our audience polling, our ever popular process, that we're learning a lot about each other, and Monique is going to come to stage. Monique Thomas, thank you.
Sorry. Good evening. Good evening. Oh, that's much better. You got to start off right. It's the last meeting. So it's the last meeting, we believe, Ferguson Commission, the 19th meeting, and it's our tradition to collect data points. That's you. So we'll be asking you to respond to a series of questions. We've been doing this since the beginning, and it's a way of capturing your presence and who you represent in the room. So first, I just want to ask a logistic detail. Does everyone have a keypad? Raise your hand if you don't have. Hold up your keypad. Okay. Okay. Who's feeling alone? Who doesn't have a keypad? Okay. Can we just help the few who don't? And in the back there.
I just want to say as well that there are some who typically waive taking the keypad, but it's really important that you take it and that you participate. Even if you typically waive it, we'd like to make sure to capture the number of people in the room.
Thank you. Okay. So who has not used the keypad polling before or used keypad polling before? Okay. Okay, it's fine. It's good. I'll walk you through. We'll have a test question, and then we'll have 12 questions. Most of them are demographic, and then we have some thematic questions related to trauma, and that's been what we've been capturing over at least the past 6 or more meetings. For most of the meetings, we've been capturing data related to trauma-informed, that experience. So you'll see that if you look at your keypad, you'll have a series of numbers/letters. And so I'll ask you a question, and then there'll be a series of answer choices. You select the answer with the corresponding letter or number that best fits your best answer, okay? So we'll do a test question, as we always do. Is everyone set? Anyone not have a keypad? All right. So this is the test question. I'm going to start with the hardest one, right? What is your favorite color? Okay. St. Louis has been very consistent in answering this test question. So I'll read the answer choices. A, black, B, brown, C, blue, D, green, E, orange, F, purple, G, red, H, yellow, I, white, J, other. So you'll see on the top screen, polling is now closed. You see polling is closed, it's red. I'm going to say polling is open, and then your answer choices will be captured, okay? Any questions? All right, let's try it. Polling is now open. You have 30 seconds. About 15 seconds. Okay. I think we're good. What will it be? Well, 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 about 1/3 blue. That's been the consistent answer every time we poll and ask the question. Blue has been the, well, I don't know what it is, but. Okay, so now we're getting into the real deal. These are the real questions. Okay, so the first one, and please just select one. And if there's a case where you need to select two, I'll let you know. In what geographic area is your primary home or residence located? A, St. Louis City, B, St. Louis County, C, St. Charles County, D, Jefferson County, E, Franklin County, F, St. Clair County, Illinois, G, Madison County, H, Monroe County, I, other, if it's not represented yet. Polling is now open. And if for whatever reason you need to change your answer, you made a mistake, it'll lack the last thing you entered. Okay? Okay, we have nearly an even split between St. Louis City, St. Louis County. Okay, and what geographic area is your primary work and/or school? Please note, if you are retired, you can select other, but A, St. Louis City, B, St. Louis County, C, St. Charles County, D, Jefferson County, E, Franklin County, F, St. Clair County, G, Madison County, H, Monroe County, I, other. Polling is now open. About 15 seconds left. Okay. So nearly 7 out of 10 of you work or attend school in St. Louis City. With which gender do you identify? Please select one. A, female, B, male, C, other, D, decline. Polling is open. About 10 seconds left. See, we have one more person that hasn't responded. It may be you. Okay. So, nearly 60% female, 43% male. Excuse me. Yep. In what age group do you belong? Now, I always invite people or remind people that we can't see who is answering. Okay, so just, you can choose to decline if you'd like, but please be honest. A, 21 and under. B, between 22 and 34. C, 35 to 44. D, 45 to 54. E, 55 to 64. F, 65 and over. G, you politely decline. Polling is now open. About 10 seconds left. Remember, you can decline. All right. So you have about 1/3 between 22 and 34, 23% between 55 to 64, and those are our greatest proportions. Okay. Now, how would you describe your ethnicity or race? A, white, B, black African American, C, Hispanic, Latino, or Spanish origin, D, Asian, E, American Indian or Alaskan Native, F, Native Hawaiian or Pacific Islander, G, other, D, decline. Excuse me, H, decline. Polling is open. Thanks, David. About 10 seconds left. Okay. About 65% who are represented in the room have identified as white, followed by about 30% African American. This is the 19th meeting of the Ferguson Commission. How many previous meetings have you attended? Please note that I'm making a distinction between these full meetings and the working group meetings. So we're not counting the working group meetings for this one, okay? So A, none, this is your first meeting. B, between 1 and 4. C, between 5 and 6. D, 9 to 12. E, 13 to 16. F, 17 or more. You've been to nearly all of them. Polling is now open. About 10 seconds left, but I think we've locked the answers. Okay, So we've had people, a lot of people who 32% their first meeting, but we also have 32% you've been to a few, so thank you for coming back. Usually our highest proportion are new folks who haven't been to meetings, so thank you. And thank you for that 1% who've done the 17 or more with us. Okay. How did you learn about today's meeting? Check all that apply. So this is one where you'll be able to select all that apply. So if all of these are accurate, you found out about the meeting through all of these things, just put A, B, C, D, and so on. So A is Facebook, B is Twitter, C, email, D, newspaper, E, radio, F, word of mouth, friend, coworker, relative, etc. G, the Ferguson Commission website, also stlpositivechange.org. And H is other. You found out doing other meets. Polling is open. About 15 seconds left. I think we're good. Okay, most of you have good friends. 40%, nearly 40% found out through word of mouth, followed by an email, and then the commission website. So this is the content-related questions. So these have to do with trauma and give your opinion about how you define these things. So first, let me note how we're describing trauma. So trauma or toxic stress, we're noting it as described as a one-time or ongoing, deeply disturbing experiences, often brought on by physical, economic, cultural, emotional, or environmental assault. Any questions or people? Is that clear to folks? Okay. So the first one is, have you experienced trauma or toxic stress as defined? As I just defined it. A, yes. B, no. C, I don't know. D, decline to respond. Polling is open. About 10 seconds left. Okay. About 80%, a little over 80% have indicated yes. Do you think the community you live in has experienced trauma? A, yes. B, no. C, I don't know. D, decline to respond. Polling is open. Less than 10 seconds. We're good. Over 90% say yes. Do you believe someone can be traumatized by racism? A, yes. B, no. C, I don't know. D, decline to respond. Polling is open. Less than 5 seconds left. Nearly all of you say yes. Have you experienced any trauma due to racism? A, yes. B, no. C, I don't know. D, decline to respond. Polling is open. About 10 seconds left. Less than 5 seconds. Nearly split, yes and no. 49% yes, 44% no, 6% not knowing. From your experience, about how many people in your community are coping with past trauma or toxic stress? Approximate, but A, very few. B, some, C, a lot. Polling is open. About 10 seconds left. Less than 5 is an approximate. Thank you. Over 50% say a lot. 41% say some. So that concludes our audience polling. Thank you again. And now I'm going to turn it over to, excuse me? Jerica, now who'll be going through audience, will be audience participation, where you'll get to do open mic. So we're actually collecting this polling, the polling keypads. So if you see your neighbor hasn't, just, politely tap them and have them return it. Thank you. Please.
And just like she says, these keypads do not open your garage door, and they will not change the channels on your television. Good evening, everyone. So as Monique has mentioned, we are going to conduct our public open mic. If you've been here prior to meetings, we allow the audience to give their feedback, suggestions, ask any questions, whatever you may have on your mind. You have 2 minutes, and I will be timing. We try to get everyone a fair chance to speak, and I will pick from our jar as far as who can go first. Again, 2 minutes, please, as we would allow for everyone to have a fair amount of time to speak. First, we are going to start with Dr. Jason Purnell. After Dr. Purnell, we are going to have Gerald Higginbottom, and then we will also have, Tom, please forgive me, Charbonneau? Yes. So if we'll have Dr. Purnell first, please. 2 minutes.
I got you. I have some handouts for the commissioners. If you could take one and pass it along. I want to state publicly what I said in an email to Rich and Starsky and the core staff of the Ferguson Commission. My congratulations on an outstanding report to the community. I know what work goes into putting together a product like that firsthand, so my congratulations to all of you. I extend that to you. I'm really here tonight to put on the record something that Starsky and I heard at a meeting recently, that there was a perception in the community that For the Sake of All, which is the report on the health and well-being of African Americans, and the Ferguson Commission were somehow separate and or competing initiatives or projects. And I want to put that to bed. These are not separate. We've been aligned from the beginning. And what you have before you is just some examples of that. So every commissioner had a copy of For the Sake of All as a report. As soon as they started their work, I came to give expert testimony in February of this year. I consulted with several of the co-chairs of the working groups throughout this process. And more importantly, if you look at the probably second to last or third to last page, there is direct alignment between the recommendations of For the Sake of All and the calls to action of the Ferguson Commission. We talked about investing in high quality early childhood. You talk about investing in early childhood education. We talked about investing in coordinated school health programs for all students. The report calls for schools as centers of health. We discussed helping low to moderate income families create economic opportunities, which included child development accounts and financial advice and services. The Ferguson Forward report talked about creating universal child development accounts and financial empowerment centers. We talked about investing in quality neighborhoods for all in St. Louis, which includes things like inclusionary zoning ordinances and low-income housing tax credit funds. And finally, faith and for the sake of all is engaging the faith community in the racial equity mission. So we have been in alignment, we will continue to be in alignment, and I pledge my the support of the For the Sake of All project as you move forward with implementation. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Purnell. And then now we will have Gerald Higginbotham. I'm sorry.
Good evening. My name is Dr. Gerald Higginbotham. I'm the Senior Vice President for the American Slave Nation. I'm the spokesperson for the descendants of American slaves, their spiritual advisors. I want to say congratulations, Darcy and Rich and the Commission for doing an outstanding job. I had the opportunity here recently to speak before the House of Lords in London, as well as in Liverpool, to go back and really go to the beginning of this thing, the problems that we've been having in our nation. And we're still dealing with I want to go on record and say this, we're still dealing with the after effect of slavery. It has never been addressed. And going to Liverpool, they sent 1.5 million slaves here to the Americas, and 400,000 of them came here to the United States. And they have apologized, and they want to work with Ferguson to begin to heal in their community in in Liverpool as well as in Ferguson. One of the issues that we still have to deal with, we have an identity issue. We've been called slaves, colored, Negroes, black, and African Americans. We got to address that on our side. We are Americans. We are the descendants of American slaves. In order to help a group of people, you first have to identify the group it is that you're really trying to help. And African Americans are different from the American slave culture. Two total different groups with two total different needs. I spoke here recently at the United States Citizenship Immigration Ombudsman 5th Annual Conference in Washington, D.C. on the 5th. And I spoke with Maria Ogman and shared with her that blacks are not burning down the community in Ferguson, and it's certainly not African Americans, because African Americans can go back to Africa, because that's a United States immigration term. And she totally agreed with me. And so I said, it's the descendants of American slaves that were born in this nation here, America's firstborn descendants, that have not been recognized, that culture. And so we have to dig a little bit deeper, and I like to work with the Commission, the American Slave Inc., as we begin to roll out a model here in this community and across this nation to bring about the change that's desperately needed.
And then Mr.
As the work of this body comes to a close, it's perfect that it be here at LaunchCode in this monument of clear thinking and the power to shape our own future. Perhaps your work will spark an epiphany of collective consciousness for our community, our nation, and perhaps our world. At best, every success will lead to some call to make a greater struggle necessary. Inevitable will be angry enemies, desertions from the ranks, with the mocking and contempt of those who will remain behind you. Be not deterred. Profits from exploitation and fearful isolation may be replaced by rewards greater than the preachers of separation and the drawers of lines on maps can imagine. Old walls built on foundations of selfishness have only served as a prison for those surrounded by them. Great ideas become manifest at the confluence of urgent need and undeniable opportunity. Our city, where rivers meet, stands as testament. Perhaps now begins the end of disenfranchisement and artificial separation endured here since the Civil War. The reward may be enjoyed by generations unborn, as we are long forgotten. It may be the only chance of immortality this lifetime will ever provide.
And then we will finish up with Scott Addison and Dan Hyatt. Scott, and then Dan Hyatt, you will follow Mr. Addison.
I just got back from a little trip back east. Rather than seeing my family on Thanksgiving, I went to a vigil in front of the White House and took part in a ceremony requesting clemency for Leonard Peltier, who this February will be a political prisoner in America for 40 years. His case as an activist for AIM, then targeted by the FBI and the infamous COINTELPRO projects of the late 60s and early 70s under J. Edgar Hoover. This was a signatory moment in the misuse, a germinal moment really, in the misuse of police and prosecutorial powers to suppress right to petition under the First Amendment, which was what it was about to begin with. My career has touched some difficult stuff because I've seen these kinds of abuses continue. And the subplot of the Ferguson crisis saw the ramifications of that and the continuing effects of those kinds of policies as we failed to address the real bounds of police powers and the use of prosecutorial powers in this country. And I think we really kind of only danced across the surface of those issues if we have failed to address the proper limits of and the exercise of police powers and the immunities that officers enjoy that shield them from accountability. Early in this crisis, there was a TV interview with Alan Howard, Professor Alan Howard of the St. Louis University Law School, and he glibly speculated that there would be a lot of hoopla and brouhaha about all this, but not much would happen in terms of real effects because of qualified immunities of police. I wrote him a note. I'd kind of conferred with him before. I'll finish in a second. And asked him if he at once taught constitutional law and not to use it. But I think that remains the issue, and I don't think this commission has really touched these really core issues in the use of police power in this country. And I've argued about the pretext of emergency law in the suppression of speech, and I don't think that got very far. So that will have to carry on.
Thank you, Mr. Addison. And Mr. Hyatt? If you don't mind introducing yourself.
My name is Dan Hyatt. I live in Maryland Heights, Missouri. I've been an advocate against the tyranny in North County through petty enforcement for the last 5 years. I want to thank the commission for the hard work. You've done much hard work. You've led a great effort, and much has been accomplished. Last December, I stood before you. I said, we don't need new laws. We need to enforce the laws we have. Yes, we need some new laws with teeth, but we continue to have the problem where we have, and I have to use the word tyranny, we have tyrants in the police and the aldermen and the mayors of North County and other municipalities. And the reason why this continues is lack of oversight, lack of accountability. And I continue to see it, and I can relate story after story after story of some of it, people go, well, it's not a big deal. Well, it is a big deal, especially when you multiply it by 1,000 and 10,000. When you have a municipality that's citing people for mismatched curtains and impounding cars for revenue. And I was cited because somebody parked a car in my driveway that wasn't properly licensed. Wasn't my car. Only in St. Louis can you be cited for somebody else illegally parking a car that's not yours. And So what I hope to see come from the commission and the other efforts is municipalities have proven over and over again by their lawsuits and other resistance that they have no intent of allowing change. They have no intent of stopping the tyranny, and they have no intent of giving up the power which they only own because of complete lack of oversight and accountability. So again, I hope that we get to enforce the laws. I hope that this commission is successful in its endeavor. Thank you.
I want to thank everyone who came up and spoke. We truly do appreciate all of your comments. I will now turn it over to Rich.
Thank you very much, Chairman. And thank you to those members of the public who not only commented this evening, but who commented throughout the process of our meetings. We've learned a great deal from you and for your engagement and participation. We're going to now turn to the main presentation of the evening, discussion of next steps in the core intermediary functions. Bethany Johnson-Javois is going to manage that presentation with a number of presenters. But before we begin that, we do have to, we want to make sure that we get on the record 2 recusals from commissioners who will so state for the record their conflict and their recusal. We have had other commissioners that recused themselves at prior meetings from this discussion or at the last meeting. That was due to the application and participation of the Applied Research Collaborative. That participation and that application for participation has been withdrawn, and so those recusals are no longer necessary, at least from the chair's perspective. That group has made that choice certainly voluntarily. So I'll ask for the 2 commissioners, Reverend Wilson and Felicia Pulliam, to state their recusal.
As consistent with prior process, I will participate in discussion but will not vote on the implementation action as I currently serve as the board secretary for Focus St. Louis.
To reaffirm that I too will participate in the participate in the discussion, but recuse myself from a vote because I am the development director for Focus St. Louis.
Thank you. That is consistent with our practice for participation in order to gain the benefit of views, but to refrain from voting for those 2 commissioners. And so we will now proceed with the presentation, and we will start with our Managing Director, Bethany Johnson-Javois.
Thank you. As setting context for those of you that were at the last meeting that we had and those of you that weren't, after the presentation was provided, we had the direct charge of staff to go back to work with Focus and additional partners, specifically working with community organizing leadership and others to ensure that we had appropriate feedback and to present to commission and community our best thoughts about what needs to happen moving forward as we think about the infrastructure needed after the sunset of the commission, which is set to take place 12/31/2015. I just want to offer to you, please, if you have it, community and commissioners, you have a presentation that should be in your material, so please pull that presentation out. We're going to walk that through now. And there's a second piece of reference material for you that you should have received called FSG Policy Link Summary that provides some background information so that you can have clarity as we're discussing about some of the content of tonight's presentation. As stated, we have multiple partners who have worked together over the course of the past almost month, if not a little over a month, to bring tonight's presentation to fruition. I will start and take the lead on speaking in the presentation. David Dwight, who is a Ferguson Commission Fellow, who's been an expert, who's been in the organizing community, especially on campus at Washington University, will come after me. Serena Muhammad, who we have at the Ferguson Commission secured in the August timeframe moving forward, provides collective impact, support, and understanding of the regional frameworks as well as the national frameworks brought to us by the St. Louis Mental Health Board as a lone resource. Yemi Akande Barch is with us as well from Focus St. Louis, who will also present tonight, and in close, Nicole Hudson, Ferguson Commission Communications Consultant. So that's the order of the lineup, and with no further ado, I'm going to direct your attention to tonight's presentation that we as staff have entitled A Roadmap for Forward through Ferguson, how the implementations of the calls to action should happen. So my goal for tonight is to cover the process that we are recommending and the process actually so far in this work. So initially, if you remember, commissioners and community, we talked about the work needing to be done differently and to be organized around collective impact, which is a national concept. It's been a proven model, and proving is still happening within the nation and within the region. So on the left, typically what would happen in the process is you'd have relationship-based committees that would have a universal issue. They would form around that issue. You'd then, in this middle circle, have time to do a detailed action plan that is member-led and direct that implementation. And then from there, you would go through the process of supporting the existing backbone leadership. And so on the right-hand side, the Ferguson Commission, we started our work, in essence, as a planning body. Many of the funds that we received were planning grant funds to talk through the 4 working group areas of our report per our executive order, and to think about how to produce those calls to action, which was the planning phase. And that work took place, it took us 10 months to do that work, from the November timeframe all the way through the report release in September. Then, as atypical in collective impact, we needed to think very clearly and closely about how we would think about implementation. And this is a different way that the design works. And so we raised the question that Serena helped us to think about as community together, if leadership would look best using the collective impact model in a single form or using multiple entities. And here's what I mean by that if you go to the next slide. In the single entity function, I'm going to direct you to 1 through 4. We would be looking in the RFQ process for this type of organization and partnerships that had broad mission and sophisticated infrastructure, had the ability to convene and coordinate and implement. And that 3 is really important, where in this structure of one single entity requires significant capacity building and would have high visibility. The other option that is on the table in terms of collective impact is a multiple entity approach, which you would see here, some of the high points. It would require the bridge for Ferguson Commission, significant relationship building, and a power balance must be shared. At that time, we began to discuss and think about what would be the best option in the region, again, in a very aggressive 3-month time frame. And what we decided in that public meeting was, as we looked at the essential functions of what collective impact provides, which are 1 through 6, we needed to put in that RFQ process, and that document captures this information, these abilities: respected neutral convener. We looked and asked for in that RFQ the ability to manage internal and external communication, that data collection and analysis is critical, the engagement of community and relationship building, as the Ferguson Commission had learned to do over the course of our time together, advocacy, fundraising, and the commitment of organizational resources. And so here, with these thoughts in mind and with these concepts that we weighed heavily over time, we then created an RFQ process in which we acknowledged the following in terms of process. We had to work with a compressed timeline, that we had very specific qualifications as outlined in the RFQ that we needed, and we knew that the infrastructure in the region did not allow for hundreds of applicants to come forward. So we did understand that there would be a limited pool of eligible entities. Our conference calls, where we would have open convenings, also modeled that, where we had handfuls of individuals who would actually participate in those public conference calls, looking for information on the RFQ process. So in terms of the process, we had a sole applicant respondent, Focus St. Louis, in which we did an iteration, this is the iterative process, that we gathered feedback from multiple people in multiple ways. For example, when the proposal was submitted, we convened an external review committee and had a public meeting with which 8 additional pieces of feedback, which we're calling priorities, were provided. And then we conducted a public presentation and received feedback from both the public and commissioners at our last meeting, in which 5 additional areas of feedback were provided. And then subsequently, we participated in several planning meetings in partnership with our staff, community organizing groups, to refine the approach in response to the feedback. This is a document, or a piece of the document, just to show you the timeline with which we worked and to be accountable and transparent as to the process from report release was 9/14, and immediately the RFQ release was 9/21. And you can see the work that we've done all the way to date through the RFQ information calls, our commitment to thinking through the evaluation and monitoring function with which we began to engage FSG and PolicyLink in conversation, all the way through our last commitment on 11/20, meeting with grassroots organizations, Focus St. Louis staff and staff of the Ferguson Commission, to today's date, which you even see a 12/7 working session, because yes, we do work, to do whatever it takes, because honestly, the urgency with which this is needed and the kind of closure with which some need in order to transition well, we understand that, and so we took this process very seriously. So that is the process part to kind of bring us up to date on where we've been, why we've made the decisions as we had in this region, and now we want to talk through some of what we have learned as we've embarked on a totally new process. So at this time, I want to ask David to come forward to talk about learnings.
Thank you, Bethany. So I'll be talking to you a little bit about the organizing community feedback that we received. Like Bethany mentioned, I'm coming from WashU, just graduated, and was involved with organizing there, doing a series of protests there, awareness campaigns, and eventually demands with the administration, which was a great transition to this work, because although the calls to action of the Commission were not demands at the behest of student protests, in a way they were at the accountability of the community and the sheer urgency of these issues. And so as Bethany just walked through the history of this process, it really continued to come up in the feedback that we received, that it was really key and important that community organizers representing marginalized communities in St. Louis were brought to the table really from an early stage. And the Commission recognized that in the last meeting as staff, and focused to go back and talk to community organizers and to, instead of looking so much at what the form of this structure would be, to look at the key functions that are necessary for the work. So here's a summary of some of the salient points from that meeting. And I won't read them all since you all have handouts, but I'd like to touch on a few of them. So transparent process of the Commission was a huge one, raising the bar rather than checking the box on these issues. Really ensuring that youth and youth development and youth involvement, really feeling like they had a stake in the decisions that were being made was a key point. Looking at advancing accountability in the region, really using racial equity as the North Star, and ensuring that those conversations came out of the margins and came into the mainstream conversations in the region. Ensuring that the convening of community members, of accountable bodies, of technical expertise continued, and that dynamic tension continued, because out of those tension moments can come the greatest change. And last, an analysis of systems and acknowledgement of how conventional structures have failed to solve entrenched problems for marginalized groups in St. Louis. And it really makes me think of the signature priorities of the report, that we live in a region where not all have access to the opportunity to thrive, really centering youth and having justice for all residents, and that there needs to be an articulation of a new philosophy of social change in the region. And just to review who was at that, who was able to attend that meeting, which was facilitated by Rebecca Bennett, Metropolitan Congregations United, David Girth, Tia Bird, and Jeff Ordauer from Missourians Organizing for Reform and Empowerment, Laura Granich from Jobs with Justice, Montega Simmons from the Organization for Black Struggle, and lastly, Rasheen was kind enough to join from Young Activists United.
Okay, so I think we've kind of established that this is unprecedented, that this is a very different approach. Collective impact in and of itself is a new model, a new design, a new way of looking at how you build momentum and build movements to address social issues. And even though that the collective impact framework was new, there is some flexibility in how it can be designed to address specific issues that are occurring in a particular community or region. So when we looked at some of the conditions that we had in St. Louis, when we looked at the fact that we had a planning group that was actually designed to produce a report, now moving into implementation, we had to make some adjustments to address some of those considerations. So I'm not going to read what's on the slide because this kind of highlights what some of the other speakers have already talked about. I think the thing to highlight, though, is that the collective impact approach is adaptable, and we did kind of push it to the limits to figure out how we could be more flexible to address the needs that emerged as we went through this process. So here are the things that we learned from the process. We knew that capacity building would be a critical role for a sole intermediary. We initially decided that the sole intermediary approach would make sense because of the timeline that we had, but we understood that asking one organization to be able to do all of these things was a heavy lift, and we recognized that in order to make sure that that one organization was successful, we'd have to build some capacity around that organization. What came from the external review process, as well as the commissioners and the public, was that there needed to be a greater focus on fundraising, grassroots mobilization, and really embedding that racial equity lens into everything that was done through this process. We also knew that there would be a need to bridge the Ferguson Commission with the implementation. So as we discussed, traditionally with collective impact, the people who actually produce the plan have some period of time where they work together towards implementation, and we didn't have the luxury of time to be able to do that, but it doesn't negate the fact that it's important to have that continuity. So we understood that we had to create a process that would allow some of that social capital that had already been created to continue into the new implementation phase. So the way that we made these adjustments was we looked at creating a bridge of former commissioners who were able to secure institutional commitments to bring into the new work in partnership with Focus St. Louis. So understanding that there is social capital that has already been built, that they have a unique understanding of the calls to action, that they have a level of momentum that can't really be replicated by any other group, that there needs to be that continuity so that people see that the folks who have been involved from the beginning, who have probably the most stake in the success of moving this forward, are still involved in some way and are still providing a bridge between all of the planning that took place into the implementation. And we also understood that it's very important to honor the fact that Focus St. Louis has already accepted a leadership role, and that when we went through this process, we understood that there would be a very limited pool of candidates who could actually meet the eligibility requirements, and that there's a high level of visibility and a high level of risk, and that an organization that is in a position to step up and accept the responsibility of assuming leadership is a good partner because of their early commitment or their early adoption. So when we talk about Forward Through Ferguson, when we talk about the bridge, we're talking about looking at the specific role of former commissioners and staff to support implementation going forward. The way that we envision this is that we would have 2 to 3 key staff who are former commission staff who would support implementation of the calls to action through a partnership with Focus St. Louis in what we're calling the Forward Through Ferguson design. We would invite other commissioners or former commissioners, 4 or more would be ideal. So this speaks to the idea of how much involvement will we need going forward from those who have already served on the commission. And we would ask those former commissioners to look at how they can make organizational commitments that would actually drive the signature calls to action forward. The importance of this is that traditionally in collective impact, you have people who are working together around a particular issue because it's something that they do in their regular everyday work. So it's not an add-on, it's helping them to actually elevate what they're already doing, and it's raising the stakes on the importance of this particular issue for them and their organization. So what we're recognizing is that as we go out into community and we ask people to step forward and make commitments to advance the calls to action, it makes sense to start off with the folks who are most invested, who have been a part of the commission process all along. So the second bullet really speaks to asking the commissioners to look within their organizations to determine what commitments they can make to drive the signature calls to action in partnership with Focus St. Louis in this Forward Through Ferguson design. The other thing that this does is it leverages the networks and relationships that already exist through Focus St. Louis. They have the ability to convene key stakeholders. They have the ability to drive the racial equity lens through the signature areas. And we think that it's important that we don't necessarily create new structures where structures already exist, but that we look at ways to lift up and support and build those structures. So we would build upon these existing partnerships. We would work with the former Ferguson Commission staff and commissioners who already have established relationships with these grassroots organizations to make sure that the community leadership is available and integrated into all stages and all levels of the implementation process. And through this partnership or this bridge between former commission staff and commissioners and Focus St. Louis, we would create this design that allows us to bring forward the momentum that's already been created with some of the opportunities that exist in working with Focus St. Louis. So this is kind of what this looks like. You've seen this graphic before, and it illustrates that racial equity is the context under which all of this work is conducted. And then there's a signature leadership ring that addresses all of the signature calls. So justice for all, youth at the center, and opportunity to thrive. The important thing to note about the signature leadership ring is it represents the key stakeholders who are already working in these spaces. So again, we're not asking for Focus St. Louis or for Forward Through Ferguson to create 3 different groups. What we're asking is that we work with the existing infrastructure in these spaces to help them self-organize. So if you have an entity that's already working in youth at the center, to connect with that group and to help them to build and align so that they can advance the calls to action. And this is a more sustainable approach. It avoids duplication of effort, and it ensures that everyone is working towards the same goals. And then that very center circle is what we've been calling the core intermediary all along, but it just shows that the work of the core intermediary, which was traditionally described as those 6 backbone functions, is shared amongst these partners. So the principles of this partnership is that at all levels, we embody the racial equity lens, that the report itself drives the work. So the signature priorities determine who's at the table, who's in the room, and who's making decisions, and all of the actions moving forward are anchored in that signature report. It's the North Star to make sure that we're moving in the right direction. And then we maintain the commitment to being unflinching, recognizing that the work will be difficult, and the reason that we're calling on all of these community resources is because we don't expect one organization or one entity to be able to do this alone, and that there is a commitment to continuous learning. Again, recognizing that collective impact is relatively new as a model nationally and especially locally, and even more recent is the integration of the racial equity lens into collective impact work. So we'll need to learn as we go and lean on some local and national resources to make sure that we're doing this to the best of our ability. So this outlines the benefits of the proposed structure. I'm not going to read some of those that I've kind of talked about on other slides, but I'll point out things that are new for this particular piece of the presentation. Focus St. Louis could serve as a fiscal agent, which would provide lean infrastructure. We think it's important that we not contribute to the proliferation of organizations and initiatives that are happening in our region. We understand that there are a lot of coalitions who are working in different spaces, and we don't want to create a situation where we're competing for resources. So it makes sense to look at an existing entity who has the capacity to serve as fiscal agent so that as we're raising money and we're finding resources that are in kind as well as for cash, that they're actually going into the implementation of the calls to action and not on a bunch of administrative or overhead costs. The other thing to look at is we have to build the capacity of the civic infrastructure over time for the entire region. So it's not just about building up Focus St. Louis or making sure that Forward Through Ferguson becomes this next big organization, but it's looking at, as we look at our landscape of what's missing, how do we make sure that we're creating opportunities to increase resources across the board so that we have the infrastructure as a region and not just within certain institutions or certain organizations. And then, as I've mentioned, we really want to avoid duplication of effort as much as possible. Okay.
Good evening, Commissioners.
Good evening.
Before I dive into my part of the presentation tonight, I think it's important that I set context. I look around the room tonight and I see a lot of familiar faces, but at the same time I see some unfamiliar faces. And so the context that I would like to set is in terms of Focus history. Now, Focus as an organization has been around for about 46 years, and we have certainly distinguished ourselves as the region's premier civic leadership organization. We have 7 programs, about to become 8, and we have close to 8,000 alums, and we're proud to say that about 70% of those alums still reside in the region. And through many of our initiatives, we touch close to 10,000 individuals annually. Now, I think in my humble opinion, I would venture to say that Focus has certainly made considerable progress to advance civic leadership in our region. And when we talk about the civic leadership that we advance, it's in educating, connecting, and engaging a broad spectrum of leaders to be able to transform themselves, not just individually, but also their community. And I think Focus St. Louis, I believe Focus St. Louis has done that really well than any other organization in the metropolitan area. I think some of you may be familiar with our history in terms of the work that we've done around policy initiatives. Some of you may remember Confluence St. Louis, which was a program that was started by the very first Leadership St. Louis class. And Confluence St. Louis went on to birth and be involved in a lot of community engagement projects. The collective history of Focus, we've also worked on significant number of policy reports. We have upwards of 45 plus policy reports. And we also started the Dismantling Racism Institute, worked on a number of public education initiatives, workforce development, and started the Bridges Group. And some of you may or may not know this, but Focus St. Louis was actually one of the founders, the co-founders of the St. Louis Business Diversity Initiative. So this is all to say that when you look at the broad spectrum of the Focus St. Louis network, we not only have staff members, we have program graduates that have led what we consider to be social transformation initiatives, and they've also participated in regional agenda setting efforts and certainly worked across boundaries and sectors to advance our region. Not to put anyone on the spot here, but just out of curiosity, those of you that are in the audience that feel led to do so, if you are a Focus alum, could you just stand up? I think that speaks for itself. Thank you, our alums. So certainly with what I've shared, we're not an organization, given our collective 46-year history, as one that rests on its laurels. And a little bit over a year ago, there were a number of significant, what I would say are internal as well as external alignments that allowed us as an organization to look inwards and re-examine what our strategic direction and commitments were. And at that point, the Focus St. Louis board, who I report to, decided that in so doing, in the expiration of, at that time, our 2011 to 2014 strategic plan, to look inwards and to look at where it is that Focus St. Louis as an organization and really as a pillar of this community was going. And to that end, over the course of 4 months, certainly I have to say there were times that it felt a lot longer than that. And, the Ferguson Commission feels that they had a compressed timeline. I'd say that the board really challenged us that so did we. There was an urgency with respect to the work that we needed to do. And so through April and August of this year, Focus alum, Focus board members all came together to help examine what the strategic direction of the organization was to be. And in so doing, we took a good look at ourselves. We also took a good look at what was happening in our community. And we realized that many that were coming to us were certainly seeking the knowledge, the skills that were needed to address some of the structural inequalities in our community. And at that time, following series of planning meetings, the board and the staff reviewed the existing mission of the organization just to determine how clearly and succinctly it communicated Focus's purpose and impact. And what we realized is that our original mission in the form that it was lacked that clarity, lacked sufficient detail in terms of the work that Focus was doing and the work that Focus was committed to doing in the community. And to that end, we came up with the first paragraph that you see up there, because we recognize that at the end of the day, when it's all said and done, what Focus St. Louis does and does well is it prepares diverse leaders to work cooperatively for the thriving St. Louis region through its experience-based leadership program, but more importantly, through our civic issue education and public engagement initiatives. We did this work from April through August, certainly ahead of the RFQ being released. So you might ask, how does this tie into the Ferguson Commission or the Forward Through Ferguson report? To us, it was evident as we started to think through whether we were going to raise our hand in accomplishing the heavy lifting of work that needs to be done in our community. And I have to say that I had the unanimous, the collective support of my board in looking at this, because we intuitively knew that our focus in our programs was on civic issue education. And given the history of our program, we have explored and exposed our program participants to many of these issues, perhaps not all, but to many of these issues. And we recognized that for Focus St. Louis, we needed to continue to be unflinching, as we had learned during our strategic process, and we needed to continue to be transformative in the type of civic issue education initiatives that we embraced. And we recognized that perhaps one of the greatest civic issues that was facing the St. Louis region today was around racial equity. And in order for our leaders that we were training, we needed to engage them in understanding that racial equity work. Second to that, again, is how does this relate to the Forward Through Ferguson report? And it's around the public engagement initiatives. And this includes our policy work, our civic engagement forums, that once again, in looking at the work that we had done to date, certainly highlighted a lot of the calls to action. But we knew there was room for growth. And we know that we have the platform with which to bring these issues to not just our alumni, but to the community at large. I'm glad that Dr. Jason Purnell was here, because we have been working with Dr. Jason Purnell. We are their community engagement partner on For the Sake of All. So in terms of relevance and alignment, we felt that there was relevancy and alignment for this work. So next, I want to talk briefly, if we can advance the PowerPoint right in front of me. There we go. So as part of our strategic planning process, another thing that we looked at is our values, our guiding principles, what really guides the majority of the work that Focus St. Louis does on a day-to-day basis. And I'm sure for our alumni, you all have memorized our values, and perhaps our new ones. But again, this was an opportunity for us to look inwards again. And in so doing, what we attempted to do is to really take a look at them, do a deep dive into them, and begin to have conversations around what do we need to refine that is in line with where our community is going. And collectively, we decided that yes, our values needed to be refined, and they needed to be reprioritized. And to that end, these are the new values of Focus St. Louis that we are moving forward with. So I'll take a couple of these without diving too much into them. Is we took a look at our programming around quality leadership. And one of the things that we recognized that in order to provide education training for leaders in a way that was impactful, we also needed to take a look at who was at that table, who was in our programming. And one of the realizations that we came to is that we needed to take a look at non-traditional leaders, because they needed to be at the table in us moving the needle in any number of the issues that we traditionally focus on, or for that matter, in this case, the 189 calls to action. Another realization that we came to is traditionally diversity and inclusion is one of our values. But following lengthy discussions, we came to the realization that equity is what we were striving for. Equity more aptly describes what our community needs in order to move forward. And to that end, equity became one of our core guiding values. Essentially, supporting fair treatment, access, and opportunities for all eliminates the disparities and strengthens the region's quality of life. And last but not least, the one that I'll focus on in terms of our guiding principles has to do with the importance of partnerships. We've heard there this evening that we cannot do it alone. There's an old African adage that it takes a village. And in this instance, as Focus attempts to take on many of the issues that were identified in the calls to action, it's going to take the whole village for this to be able to be successful. And so we're continuing to work on partnerships. We talked a little bit about recognizing at our last meeting that not everyone that needs to be at the table was there. And to that end, we started to reset the table. Some introductions were made on our behalf. And we had those, what I would call candid, courageous conversations in ways that I would say for both parties, it was enlightening. It was a great, great opportunity for us to do that. Because if we're going to tackle our complex community issues, we need to talk to everyone. So another thing that we've done, that we've outlined, has to do with this category that we're calling, what are the principles of the partnership? And what we did was we looked at focus values, some of which I've already outlined and explained. And we positioned that against the principles that have been set forth by the Ferguson Commission. And we noticed that there's some crosswinds. Talked a little bit about the racial equity lens and how an important factor that has become in our values. And if we look at the breadth of work that Focus does, the racial equity lens certainly is something that moving forward can be applied to every single one of Focus's values. The second principle set forth by the Commission, using the report as an anchor in issue-based efforts. We look at that in terms of our programming, we look at that in terms of our community collaboration, and we look at that in terms of regional perspective, that inclusivity is what is going to lead to transformation. And I was joking with one of the Ferguson staff members that, there are a lot of language and words that have come out of the Ferguson Commission. And I think we could put all those words together because they are very powerful: unflinching, transformative, racial equity. Those are key things that can and should and will drive change in any community. So when it's all said and done, we believe that Focus has what the Forward Through Ferguson needs in order to be able to move the needle on the calls to action. We've built the trust in community, and as you see by those who stood up today, that we are also in community. And so as we move forward with this, we believe that transformation is possible and is doable. Thank you.
Okay, me again. And I just have 2 slides. So one of the things that has happened in the process of figuring out how these two could form a core intermediary is looking at the principles of implementation. So these are the things that have come up as being important to all of the groups that gave feedback throughout the process. So whether it was through public comment or from the commissioners directly, these were the things that we thought needed to be raised up as key considerations as we're looking at how to move forward. So they may not have been highlighted in the request for qualification process, but as we received feedback, we recognized that these would be critically important. And what we did was we outlined which entity would take primary responsibility for making sure that these principles were actualized. It doesn't mean that one would necessarily not work in this space, but it means that if you see one X, that entity is saying that they're taking primary ownership for making sure that this moves forward, that this principle is lived out in the implementation process. And I'm not going to read the list because you have it in front of you, but I will just call out a couple just in case the language is not clear because of just the constraints of space. So where it says disaggregated data, what that's specifically talking about, I think we talked about at our meeting last month, is looking at disproportionality. So not just looking at regional numbers, but really getting down to the neighborhood level to figure out where resources are needed. And that's how the racial equity lens is applied to data analysis. And we're saying that that should be a core principle of how we move forward as we're looking at data in this space for implementation. And then another one that I think might need some further explanation, the youth leadership pipeline. It came out in most of the feedback that we received that we really needed to make sure that youth were at the center. And that's not just having a youth organization present, but that's actually being in community, working with youth to make sure that there's an opportunity and a pipeline for them to have their voice as young people, but also to go throughout processes and structures that would allow them to influence what happens at organizational level, at government level, at systems, and at policy level. So it's a complete pipeline to make sure that youth are engaged at every stage. Okay, and then this next slide is just proposed roles and responsibilities. So when you talk about having a group that's kind of emerging, the Forward Through Ferguson with former commissioners and former staff and Focus St. Louis, it's very important that you have clear understandings of who's responsible for what. And this is kind of a first pass at looking at, out of those very core intermediary key tasks, how they would be assigned going forward. So again, I'm not going to read the entire list, but we talked about Focus St. Louis serving as the fiscal agent. We also look at public convening as happening in more than one way. So Focus St. Louis has their customary approach to convening that they would be well positioned to do, but we also think that the public process that the Ferguson Commission has used to date makes sure that there's accountability, that there's always a public eye on the process, and that it would be valuable to continue to have public convenings at that level, that Forward Through Ferguson can make sure that there's always transparency throughout the process. And then I didn't speak before too much about the relationship with FSG and Policy Link, but we did kind of briefly discuss the fact that there will be the need for continuous learning, developmental evaluation, and other processes to make sure that as we go along, we're able to course correct based on what's happening in real time. And that's what those coaching relationships with FSG and Policy Link are designed to do.
Thank you. Good evening. I get the fun slide. So one of the key questions that's often asked about this work is how do you pay for it? How do you fundraise? How do you not bifurcate the investments that are already in our region? This is an extremely generous region with a lot of capacity. And one of the things that's become clear over and over in our work is that alignment is something that we can gain a good deal of ground on, and that is not different here when we talk about funding philosophy. We need to be able to start to see how investment in implementation is an investment in the work. So as Jason spoke tonight about the CDA efforts and early childhood education, a lot of those align with things in the report. And if we're truly to design the implementation work around the report, we should be able to start to see how investments here, even if they're not going directly to the organizations who might be running the report, are directly supporting the implementation of the report. So that's a new way of looking at our investments in the region. Being able to take a partnership approach to fundraising. So as we, as core intermediary, would identify opportunities and gaps for leveraging existing work in the community, being able to clearly identify those and maybe look at going after fundraising in a partnership manner. So again, that we're tying it back to the report. And then existing interest in this unprecedented approach from national resources. Throughout this process, we've had a number of advisory conversations on various aspects of implementation and process, and we believe there's a lot of opportunity there for that. You know, while there will, of course, need to be some operational funding, really looking at how we can apply whatever thinking and creativity we have to optimize existing work and optimize existing resources will be key. I'd like to say that if we're doing it right, that the Forward Through Ferguson entity might go out of business in terms of implementation, because we're truly aligning existing resources that already exist, raising the racial equity lens, and helping people understand how they can embrace the calls to action and move them forward as existing entities. So after our discussion tonight, it is our vision that we would hit the ground running through the end of the year and the sunset of the commission. Things that we would know that we needed to immediately address are putting together a true memo of understanding that would detail a strategic partnership between the Forward Through Ferguson entity and Focus St. Louis, partially probably very much informed by the discussion tonight. We would need to confirm how this entity would be designed. There are lots of questions about how to maintain independence, also be able to enter into partnerships and contracts. So that would need to be something that would be figured out through the details as we started to discuss them. We would continue to have discussions with PolicyLink and FSG. You should all have had opportunity to grab a handout when you came in that gives you a little bit of background on the work of PolicyLink and FSG, and if you did not get that, it is available up front as well. They have been an advisor as we go forth, and one of my favorite stories is the people who wrote the book on collective impact have told us that we're doing it differently than anybody has ever done it before. So that is both encouraging and terrifying. We would continue our conversations that we've begun with grassroots organizations to help identify what partnership in this work looks like to them. We often talk about bringing them to the table, having core partnerships, but in reality, organizations look different. And the way that organizations are designed, it's important to take that into account when you talk about true partnership and what that really looks like. So we'd want to continue those conversations that we've started. And then, of course, build and finalize initial budget numbers and start to identify funding. So that's not much to do before the end of the year. So we wanted to sort of take a specific look at some of the opportunities that we might have to learn from FSG and PolicyLink, who've been doing this work nationally. Training, ongoing coaching perhaps, an external assessment of our partnership process, this process that we're developing based on their work and based in their work. And then have that national third-party perspective and help us learn how to design it so that we can be using local resources for implementation, but get the best thinking from their experience nationally. And then also support in the design process and outcome evaluation, as well as helping design monitoring and accountability infrastructure. We haven't spoken a lot specifically about evaluation and monitoring. Initially, it was in our design to do 2 RFQs, one for the core intermediary, and then follow that up with one for evaluation and monitoring. But as our process is iterative and constantly morphing, we are focusing here on this process now, and also maybe seeing that there's a different way that we might approach that than we initially thought. So looking again to their expertise, because as you can see from those handouts, that is something that specifically FSG has a long history in evaluation, and PolicyLink has a really strong history of working directly in and with communities, the people closest to the issues, to help design accountability. And so these are some of the ideas about what the strategic partnership between Forward Through Ferguson and Focus St. Louis might start doing on January 1st, right around the corner. I won't read all of these to you, but a lot of these are based on things that are already happening every day in the office. We're getting calls to help explain the racial equity lens. We're getting calls to help further articulate the policy versus programs. There's actually a handout that you also can get tonight that outlines that. Really mapping what our capacity, assets, challenges, opportunities are as they pertain to the specific signature calls to action and the signature priorities, being able to really take a look at how all of those things work together and provide a centralized place for that. Another piece of feedback we've heard consistently is that the storytelling and the presencing of these issues in real people's lives is something that people are both using in their own work and finding a way into the issues that they haven't before. So that's a very important piece that we would want to continue. Sharing our learning as we go is really important. And then articulating a theory of social change. Everybody enters into this work from a different place, and everybody enters in with their own experiences. And in order to have a North Star, we have racial equity as our North Star based on the title of the report, but as a region, to really have a North Star, we need to go through a process of really articulating what our own theory of social change is for us, so that even though we work at it through possibly different paths, that we're all moving in the same direction. That's it. I think we are now open for questions.
I want to clarify whether or not Focus St. Louis hasn't already flinched in Ferguson once. And it's my understanding that September of 2014, Focus St. Louis was supposed to have a group of fellows go to the city of Ferguson, and after the unrest popped off, that didn't happen. So my question for Focus St. Louis is, why didn't your group of fellows go to Ferguson in the midst of unrest? Was the unrest why you canceled that trip? And if so, did you flinch?
So I thought I was going here, but I can't. That's fine. Okay, we'll do them together.
Chris, I know deep down inside of you, you probably want to be a Focus program participants, and at some point in time we'll maybe convince you to be so. So having said that, it's not a matter of flinching. As it was, the fellows were coming from all over the country. And to then, I don't know if you're familiar with the logic study that our fellows do in community. And to that end, just because of the, at that time, instability of what was going on in Ferguson, because the staff generally helps a ton with securing the interviews, it was something that could not necessarily be guaranteed at that time. And so when we're trying to, when we run a program that's around talent attraction and retention, you know, putting them in an environment where we can't necessarily know or guarantee what's going to happen, I don't think it'll be a good way to necessarily welcome individuals to the city. And so at that point, the decision was made for them to go elsewhere.
Thank you. This period of questioning is both commissioners and community. So if you're a community member who has a question, just raise your hand. If you're a commissioner, you've got mics, so please jump in, and we will facilitate the answers to those questions.
Sure. Hi, I'm Scotty Addison. I just took note of one point of this, which was really interesting, that Focus St. Louis proposes to act as a fiscal agent. And from long, hard experience, that role can be very useful in terms of not having to recreate all sorts of management infrastructure for funds. It's very useful in the formation of new organization and getting it off the ground, where a fiscal agent can stand in those shoes and let people do the work. In this instance, is that function going to extend to, I mean, obviously it can serve existing organizations which are well established and not have to recreate that infrastructure. In the spirit of what I'm talking about, does that also serve for independent operators and unconventional leadership? And that segues to a second question. How are you going to include unconventional leadership? Because that's kind of a dear topic to my heart, having been unconventional for a long time and getting things done that big organizations didn't do and didn't know how to do throughout my career. And so I'm really interested in how you involve that kind of unconventional leadership. I've had a tough experience with the commission because there are times I found the participatory process not very open, and I had the feeling my best bet was to tie a note to a rock and heave it over the wall and wonder what was going to happen if it landed there, because I'd never find out. So this, whether you're able to really engage the people in the trenches or just, you know, the same old friends, is a real issue here.
Thanks, Scotty. Nicole responded. Thanks for letting us know where that rock came from, too. Appreciate that. We'll talk later, bro. We'll talk later.
Also, P.S., I'm so glad that you're here, Scotty, because it would not be the last meeting without you. Like, so, power to Scotty. No, that's awesome. Thanks for carrying it. Thank you for carrying it. We appreciate it. So I think the first question was about fiscal agency, and just to clarify, the thing we're putting forward is that for the independent entity that would be the Forward Through Ferguson, that Focus would serve as their fiscal agent. So it wouldn't be necessarily for other folks who are doing the work. So that being said, the thought is that moving from planning to implementation, that the participatory nature, the leadership would be designed around people who are working toward implementation. So the people who would be at the table, the people who would seek to be at the table, would be people who are doing the direct work of implementing around the calls to action. In addition to that, I think, you might disagree, I think that even through the life of the commission, you know, we've had to learn along the way, partially given our structure of the public meetings, et cetera, how to more effectively engage the people in the trenches. And I think because, again, I was speaking earlier about the nature of partnership with grassroots organizations, that partnership always doesn't look like we think it does. And so one of the immediate things that we need to learn, that we've started to learn, is around how to have those conversations in a way we can understand what partnership means to them. And as it pertains to the calls to action, being able to design partnerships that both drive that change and also keep those voices at the table, because if those voices are not at the table, we're not getting the work done.
Scotty, if we could, we want to get in as many questions as we can, so we'll move on to someone else. We'll ask others if you would prioritize as well your critical questions.
Hi, Kira Vanile. Quick question. There was a sense of urgency with putting a plan together and having it executed by the 31st of December. And the only thing that I didn't hear in the strategy moving forward is at least some date. So they could also drive some urgency to like expedite the process and get to the point of executing on the plan. Can you talk to that?
Sure. So I will say that that is something that we should add to our list of first steps, and that to me is a key part of that first asset mapping, really understanding. So also I will say that we have a lot of stuff that we've heard is moving, and so part of the design of how this new partnership will work will have to do with some parallel processing of both making plans for long term, but also understanding what's short term already moving. And so I would think that one of the initial first steps we would add to that list would be to set some benchmarks, understanding how to articulate movement without putting ourselves in a place where we don't have enough time to do the work. But some sort of external communication of deadlines and a work plan would be something that we would want to put forward before the 31st.
I'll slip in a question on behalf of commissioners. In the slide deck, there are a couple of slides labeled Partnering for Change, and following it, one that is noted headed Forward Through Ferguson, in which there are questions about commissioners or former commissioners at this point, quote, securing institutional commitments from commissioners. And then on the next page on Forward Through Ferguson, it says, especially, quote unquote, organizational commitments. Wanted to ask if you could give some examples of what those kinds of commitments are and clarify as to whether that also is some personal involvement of commissioners beyond December 31st.
So I think it can be personal as well as institutional. But for institutional examples, I think Deaconess Foundation might be an example. So if you decide that there are particular calls to action that you would want to advance with the Deaconess Foundation, actually coming out and making a public commitment saying that we're going to take this particular piece of the work on, or we're going to change our internal policies to reflect what we've learned through the process. But it's asking commissioners to look at how they can advance the work through their own organizations, because that enhances the sustainability, and it also shows that there's commitment from those who actually put the plan forward, and we think that it might attract others who are in a wait-see mode to see that there's actually folks that are starting to step up and take pieces of the work on and take responsibility for the work.
So I'm an easy target. How might that work for a non-social 501c3 kind of commissioner worker?
So I said that it could be institutional or personal, because if you're not in a position where you can make an institutional commitment, then it may just be a personal commitment that you would want to continue to work on a particular issue. But I think that if you work for a university, if you work for a hospital system, if you work for law enforcement, there are several places where there can be intersection between what we do in our day-to-day lives with what we're asking to be done in the calls to action. And I think the main point is to be reflective, or to be self-reflective as commissioners, as you're putting the calls to action out to the community. What have you done within your own organization to demonstrate walking forward on the calls to action yourself?
Got it. Thank you.
Yeah, Ron Jackson. I want to applaud you all's effort. It's been amazing what you've done in a very short period of time, and you've given the community a real opportunity. And you know, as an OG,
Triple OG. Kobe, you're using Kobe language. You're a triple OG.
well, you know, I've seen a lot of efforts to change in St. Louis. I mean, we've all seen millions of dollars spent to solve essentially the same problem that you all have been talking about. So, you know, to me, one of the things that we haven't done very well, in my opinion, in St. Louis, and that is build trust. I mean, you know, we've got all these organizations that are going to be working together, right? And, you know, because we sit at the table and talk about the issue, that doesn't say what it means when I look in his eyes, right? And when I'm thinking about him. So one of the things I would really encourage Focus to do is develop a strategic way of building trust and relationships among the agencies, the many agencies that you're going to be working with. And I'm talking about sometimes it's worth spending money to go on a retreat, spend a weekend talking, learning, playing with people to learn something about who they are, than it does sitting around the big conference table talking about the issues. So I think that there are some things that you all have done and will continue to do that will really make a difference over the long term. And finally, I would say that defining the racial equity framework is important, because just saying we've got a racial equity framework, most people don't know what you're talking about. So that needs to be defined so that people will have some clarity about what the end game is. You say in the document what the end game is, but you know, you need to say we need to do this in order to get to the end game.
Yeah. Thank you. Commissioner Becky James Hatter.
Yeah, I would just like to follow up on the last question from the co-chair. So when you're talking about the former commissioners, I just heard one part of the answer. So are you not saying you're asking for people to continue the level of work they're doing right now? It's not continue kind of be a commissioner but not be called one? Or is it to work in your own organization to bring to life the call to action? So just want to clarify it, make sure I got the not in this.
Right, the latter. It's all about implementation, so it's institutional or personal commitment to move into implementation. It's not the same role of meeting regularly to plan or to discuss the cost to action.
Thank you very much.
So before you let all these folk off the hook, I want to make sure, because she was asking an exclusionary question. Is there in the deck or anywhere in your mind a request, because we talked about this in our last meeting, a request for volunteerism in this framework from current commissioners?
Yes, there is absolute need for that. One example of how volunteerism could also look, for me, it was an atypical model and it worked quite well. It's also in loaned executives. So if for institutions or organizations that you know that there is already, you don't want duplication, you know someone that can do this work, you have someone in the shop that perhaps can play a specific role for a discrete amount of time, or you have you've already paid a consultant to research an issue or to do a roadmap that you know would be helpful. Bringing those types of assets forward that you've already funded, already invested in, or individuals that you know would be great in that skill set, loaning that resource to this work are also some specific examples of way that both commissioner organizations, individuals, as well as regionally could help.
I don't want to hog, but if not as volunteers, where in the structure is governance for the partnership? Where in the partnership structure is governance?
So the way that we have envisioned it here, they're two separate entities. So Focus has its governance, and this entity, in this nascent conversation of its design, our theory is that it might have a leadership body that's made up of people who have organized around the implementation. So for example, there might be someone from Focus because they have a stake in being a strategic partner. Any one of the commissioners that might decide to move forward based on a specific ask at a later date might be on that leadership council, would be on that leadership council because they are moving toward implementation. If we were to do, I'm making this up right now, though I guess it's going on the record, if we were to do a strategic partnership with For the Sake of All around funding and implementation, somebody from that would probably be on this leadership council. So the thought that we have in our mind is that instead of creating sort of a body that sort of nods and affirms and supports, that it's a body of people who are deeply involved in the work in some way, shape, or form, that also nods and supports and does all those things.
Other questions from community or commissioners?
I have a question.
T.R. Carr. Yes, sir.
Question about the Forward through Ferguson. What is it? Is it a 501c3? Is it a private corporation? 501c4? What is it? Because you've talked about it with a lot of responsibilities. You're creating this entity. It's kind of fuzzy to me.
It is fuzzy. It is very fuzzy. So one of the challenges of putting function before form is not answering those questions first. So we have talked through sort of the laundry list of things that it might be and kind of gone pros and cons about what it is. But one of the steps between now and the 31st would be to put forward what we think our best thinking is about what that should be. And part of that will have to do with the details of the MOU with Focus, if they should be the fiscal agent. So there are a number of details that kind of weigh on what the best decision is for that form. But it will have some sort of form that enables it to partner and to enter into contract and et cetera.
And what is the budget that you have? You said that you'll be one of the tasks is to develop a budget.
Right.
What are you looking at? And have you had conversations with funding agencies to fund this Forward through Ferguson entity, whatever it's going to be?
Right. So we have put 159% of our energy since the last meeting into clarifying this structure as clearly as we could for the purposes of this meeting. So we have not done a thorough assessment of what budget might look like. There are also some major considerations for that, loaned executives, design. So we have put in front of that sort of articulating the structure, and we do not have sort of a formal budget as of yet, but that will be one of the first things that we do. In terms of speaking to funders about it, we have not spoken to funders specifically about this design because literally fresh off the press, but a lot of the principles and the things that are highlighted in this design are things that have come from funders as being very important for them to see. So that'll be another quick follow-up conversation once we get through tonight.
We'll have an intentional design conversation among commissioners even after the Q&A, so there may be some thoughts around that we'll have a chance to get some input. Commissioner Packnett.
I have a couple of questions, as I want to do. One of them actually is a follow-up to that, though, because I appreciate, excuse my voice, I appreciate the approach that you are letting community voice, right, dictate the design instead of the other way around. But this sub-point in the steps between now and December 31st, the second one says confirm how Forward through Ferguson should be designed. I'm wondering if there are thoughts already as to who's involved in that confirmation, in that process.
Who's involved in Forward through Ferguson, or who's involved in the process of the design? So continuing conversation with commissioners, conversations with our strategic partner, continuing conversations that we have started with grassroots organizations, and we have by no means spoken to all of them, and key stakeholders. But as this process has been driven a lot by staff and staff experience, I think we would probably move forward some straw models for reaction.
Mm-hmm. Helpful. And then my other two questions are related to Focus and other additional partners that I know have yet to be named or figured out. One of them, it relates to what Serena was saying earlier about our organizational responsibilities, right? So for example, Teach for America, which I run full-time, has already, throughout the year has taken on a number of organizational changes given what our community has been going through, but we've been leveraging the Ferguson Commission report as an additional vision setting process for us in order to be able to do that. And so I'm glad to hear that you all are strongly urging those of us on the commission and outside of the commission with opportunity to do that, to be able to make those shifts and take that responsibility. My question is that for Focus and any additional partners that are more formal parts of this, will those kinds of shifts be suggestions? Will they be required in order to participate? Like how are we thinking of that? Like that is open to anybody. But.
So the slide that was, do we still have this possibly? No. So if you look at the slide that is principles of partnership, I believe there are 4 bullets on it.
Yes.
That is a slide that is really meant to articulate the posture with which we would expect a core partner to enter in. And understanding that, as many people have said about their organizations, based on what's happened in the last year, we've started this process. I think understanding steps that might be taken is acceptable, as opposed to you must do this right now before we start to talk to you.
Sure.
But that is the posture with which we would expect a partner to come forward. And I think that as we talk to FSG and PolicyLink about accountability, about training, about looking at the racial equity lens at the core, that those will be things that would be required of partners as well. But that's something that, as we look at the MOU and as we look at the design, that will solidify. But ultimately, if we're doing it right and we are really centering on the calls to action, the signature priorities, and racial equity, anybody who partners with us in a core way would almost have to embody that in order to be legit. I think anybody who would partner at the core and didn't move to or actually embody the principles that are outlined in the report would open themselves up to a lot of pushback. So it's almost a no-brainer, but I believe